Hello and welcome to another edition of How to Do Life. Today we're going to talk about being smart. Uh, Later in the show I hope to talk about the upsides and downsides and choices you have in being intelligent in the workplace, uh, outside of work. But first I want to read a letter. It's a composite letter that's just based on what a number of clients have written to me and said to me. And my reactions to it. It's a very common problem where an adult feels that he or she is not as intelligent or as accomplished as his or her one of her parents. And my advice. So here is the letter. Dear Dr. Nemko, I'm no dummy, but aren't as bright nor as accomplished as my dad, who's a genetic physicist at a top university, and he receives millions of dollars every year or every 2 years in grant money and speaks all over the world, at least until COVID hit. I know I'm only supposed to compete with myself, but I find myself not even wanting to be my own best self. So I have an easy, lame job in a Macy's sweater department. I probably even wouldn't have written to you except that Macy's is closing 125 more of its stores, including the flagship Seattle store where I work. Amid COVID, I'm afraid that with my resume, clothing clerk, I'll forever be doomed to be an embarrassment to my family and to myself. Can you help? And here's my response. Of course, this person is right. There are very few people who could compete with a father who is some big physicist who's getting zillions of dollars of grants. At least that person can compete on the father's terms, but it doesn't mean that the person needs to fold, let alone fold sweaters as their career. So what I would ask this person is, on what metric could you, with training and effort, excel without competing with your dad? So maybe this person could excel in a career that requires emotional intelligence. After all, we know a whole lot of science nerd types who are long on cognitive intelligence but aren't so great in the emotional intelligence realm, which is very important for a wide range of careers, from psychologist to salesperson. How about artisanry? Just because somebody is a great physicist doesn't mean they're a great an artisan, whether it's in baking bread or doing tile work or being a fine artist or a writer or even a public relations person, or perhaps entrepreneurship. You know, it's one thing to be an academic and getting these millions of dollars of grants, but that's very different from owning a cafe or a laundromat or an online business. Might this person be able to, without directly competing with their dad, changing the metric and not feeling you're doomed to be inferior, but feel like you've got a chance of being excellent but on your own terms? And apart from career, there are ways to be more intelligent and successful, thoughtful as you walk the earth. For example, I want to give examples for these overheated times that we're in. So this person might want to consider the following concepts. I put together a list of 15 concepts that are signature characteristics of the intelligent, thoughtful human being. And by being aware of these concepts and incorporating them more into your daily life, you're ending up being more intelligent, attracting more intelligent friends, feeling better about yourself, and even in in this person's conversations with her dad, she will sound very intelligent and worthy of respect. So the first of them is the term fair-minded. That term encourages statesman-like, stateswoman, is that a term these days? The term fair-minded encourages, I think I'll stay with statesman-like. It's just so, I've never heard stateswoman before. Anyway, that term encourages statesman-like rather than ideologue-type thinking. And when you use the term fair-minded, it also adds gravitas to whatever it is you're saying. So for example, a fair-minded analysis would raise the following issues. Right? So the next concept that would be a way to enhance your intelligence, and it really is, by thinking of these concepts, you actually increase your functional intelligence. It doesn't matter whether it increases your test scores. But the next term is externalities. Most problems have multiple causes. For example, a person may be poor not just because of their intrinsic weaknesses, but because of externalities, maybe a problematic family, a difficult neighborhood, a culture that doesn't value success, limited access to capital, and so on. Another example of a concept that if you try to make that a part of your thinking process and your conversations, you will be more successful, more intelligent, etc. And that's the term under-discussed, or there's a parallel term, under the radar. So, for example, a perspective that's under-discussed but worthy of consideration is, and then you can insert it. And that's really a great thing to be talking about. When I do my writing, I'm always thinking about what is an under-discussed topic, a topic that's worthy but doesn't get a lot of attention. Because if it gets a lot of attention, then I'm not adding any value. It's like with this radio show. There is very little discussion about bright people. There's always talking about, people with problems and challenges. And so I deliberately chose this topic of focusing on issues of bright people, because it's a relatively unmet need, and yet, there are certainly a hell of a lot of bright people out there, and hopefully listening to this radio show. The next concept worthy of consideration is thought experiment. In trying out an idea, you might create a thought experiment. So here's an example. Imagine there were two identical Earths, and in one, all the hiring was done purely on the candidate's merits, and in the other Earth, efforts were made to compensate for certain groups' past and current injustices and inequalities. In which Earth do you think greater good would ultimately accrue? Again, it's kind of a sign of intelligence, and whether you're going to, like this woman's father, is not going to be a nuclear physicist or a genetic physicist, it doesn't mean you can't be very intelligent on different terms. And we all know people who are academically brilliant who don't in the real world act very intelligently. Next is, the next concept is ad hominem. Now that term refers to disagreement by calling names rather than by a reasoned argument. For example, I'm dispirited by the amount of ad hominem disagreement on cable news shows, social media, comments on internet articles, and even on YouTube music videos. The next concept is probabilistic. Key to critical thinking is to make probabilistic assessments of the various alternatives to a problem. For example, here's what somebody might say. The realistic best case scenario is X. For these reasons, and then you would insert the reasons, I insert the probability of that occurring at 30%. The realistic middle outcome is Y, and for these reasons, which you then insert, I assess its probability of occurrence to be 60%. And the realistic worst case scenario is Z, and for these reasons, I assess the probability of it occurring at 10%. Probabilistic thinking, very potent, very helpful, a real sign of intelligence, and it will increase your functional intelligence if you use concepts like that. The next concept is almost as important. It's called opportunity cost. As I said, anyway, here's an example of opportunity cost. Before our nonprofit invests in a new building, we should consider the opportunity cost. We could just spend a bit to fix the old building and use the rest of the money to hire tutors and other staff that would serve our clientele. The next concept that's a way of building your intelligence, and especially in these roiling times, help ensure thoughtful conversation, and therefore you'll gain the respect of at least people who are worthy of respect. And that term is cherry pick. Cherry picking is the use of unrepresentative examples to make a point. For example, a client told me, he was late to work and he didn't get in trouble, yet when I was late, I almost got written up. Well, cherry picking militates against solid decision making. So I'm going to often call that out with my clients and even with just other people. Cherry picking, an anomalous example should not be generalizable to the overall situation. Give me a moment. Okay. Next concept is iterate. Most excellent things didn't start excellent. They underwent iterations, that is, revision after revision. So, for example, you might say, let's come up with a quick and dirty first draft plan, and then we can iterate it. The next concept that I think will improve your intelligence to the extent to which you can use it as you develop your thinking is the word pervasive. The word pervasive refers to a widespread but not a universal belief. For example, the pervasive view is that cognitive behavioral psychotherapy in general has better efficacy than do other modalities. The next concept is mitigate. Too few interventions, unfortunately, cure or solve. Mitigate is usually a more accurate descriptor. For example, in many cases, SSRIs mitigate depression's lows. The next concept, I love the next one. It's really central to good decision-making, good rational thinking. And it's meta-analysis, and there are related terms like meta-evaluation or even review of the literature. So many studies are flawed because of an inadvertent error, because of investigator bias, which alas is pretty damn pervasive these days, or the infeasibility of doing rigorous research. Meta-analysis and its cousins, meta-evaluation and literature reviews, analyze multiple studies, and so they produce more valid findings. So where you can, especially in looking at social science research, which is especially prone to such errors, try to find and base your thinking and discussions on those, what I call aggregational studies. Got 3 more. Next concept that's going to build your intelligence, build the thoughtfulness of discussions you have, is the term zeitgeist. Zeitgeist describes an era's dominant values and beliefs. For example, the current zeitgeist values redistribution toward a society in which everyone is treated more equally. Next one is ideological diversity. Important concept, especially I think in these roiling times. We are told to celebrate diversity, and many of us claim to do it. But we tend to stop celebrating and start censoring or censuring, dare an idea veer from the orthodoxy of the day, from the zeitgeist orthodoxy. The truth really is that wisdom resides across the ideological spectrum. So you might use the term ideological diversity to encourage a mindset in yourself and in others that isn't overly censoring. And the final concept that is a hallmark of intelligence and can build yours is what I call cosmic justice. That may be the highest goal. As often as possible, think of an action's implications, not just on the stakeholders, but on how that action or idea comports with universal justice, with a cosmos that, if there were a God, would make him or her nod. I'm going to take a brief break, and when I come back, I'm going to talk about the burdens of the brainiac. I'm going to talk about what a bright person can do to make the most of who they are in the workplace and in their personal life and as a parent. So stay with me. I'm Marty Nemko. Thanks very much for staying with me here on How to Do Life. Now, as promised, I've just finished going over some ways in which I read a composite letter from somebody whose father was a genetic physicist at a major university, a brilliant guy, and his child doesn't feel that she can compete. And I tried to provide a number of ways in which she can, on her own metric, excel, and some ways to boost her own intelligence. Now I want to talk about the brainiac's burdens. No matter how smart you are, it ain't all roses. Maybe most notably, intelligent people tend to see more complexities in problems and in situations, and so they tend to worry more. So I'll take an example that's not political. If someone has cancer and they're quite bright, they can think of all the possible scenarios. What would happen medically, sociologically, with their family, with themselves, with their career, what are the risks and rewards, if the different, do I do chemotherapy, do I not, do I do this, do I do that? And that can torture people a lot more than somebody who isn't quite as intelligent, where the doctor says, I recommend you do this treatment, and the chances are you'll be fine, and they accept it more literally. So intelligent people can see more complexities in situations, and thus they tend to worry about it more, and that's whether it's a personal problem or a societal one, or a workplace one. Intelligent people may feel the burden of having to be the smartest guy or the smartest gal in the room. There's an expectation you're going to be smart by others and yourself. And nobody, no matter how brilliant, is going to be smart all the time. And that's a burden. It's exciting in some ways, but it's also a burden. Another burden of the brainiac is they are often caught between showing their intelligence and appearing like a know-it-all, or dumbing themselves down, which can be frustrating. And if they appear like a know-it-all, so often the lesser lights in the workplace will do what they can to sabotage the person, withhold information, disagree for the sake of disagreeing, going to the boss and say this person's not a team player. So, the smart it's really yucky to be really smart and have to, dial it back and dumb yourself down, because then you're not contributing as much as you can. You're not being your whole self. It's like somebody who's great at running, and having to slow down because it's a fear of alienating the co-runners. Very frustrating. Another burden of the brainiac is that they're more likely to feel bad if they, like everyone, says or does something foolish. Nobody is brilliant all the time. Smartest people make dumb statements. They think they may make an impulsive decision. They may think too quickly. So it's quite a burden to be going through life thinking you always got to be smart. And of course, it's important to try to realize that you're human. You're not a machine like a computer who's always going to be as smart as possible. And finally, many brilliant people end up not changing the world as much as everyone thought they would, not even their sphere of influence. And that can lead a very intelligent person, as they start to look back on their life in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it could lead them to feel quite disappointed with their life. So there are advantages to not being as brilliant as the PhD, brilliant, zillion-dollar grant-getting genetic physicist. Now that person is probably right when she wrote that it is unwise to try to compete with that brilliant, highly accomplished dad. But it doesn't mean that she or you, my dear listeners or viewers here, can't succeed on your own terms. And you can improve so you can be your best self. Plus, if you can accept that your best self is good enough, you may make plenty of contribution and maybe good money while carrying a lighter psychological burden, and that is not a bad balance. Now, as promised, I want to turn to being intelligent, advice for intelligent folks in the workplace, and then I'll do intelligent people in their personal life, and then as parents. It really is true that bright people are happiest when they are working in work groups with their peers. When a group is too heterogeneous and there's somebody who's very lackluster, it can be very frustrating, the aforementioned catch-22, in which they've got to either show their full intelligence and therefore alienates the others, or pull punches and be quiet and not show their whole self. So in looking for a job, or when you're on the job, to try to be on teams of your relative peers can be a real key to being the best, making the best of who you are, and enjoying yourself at work. And if you're in a situation where that's simply not possible and you don't want to leave, try to do individual projects. People who are very intelligent can often do an amazing amount by themselves. So think of a project that maybe is consistent with the goals of your organization or your boss, and something that would excite you, and ask if you can either have release time to work on that project, or maybe even be willing to be taken on your own if you think that's appropriate. Let's turn now to in personal life. The same general principle holds. I think, and I've found with my clients, that having friends and romantic partners of similar intelligence may be among the most important characteristics of compatibility. Who knows whether it's as compatible, as important as, compatible looks, compatible sexuality, compatible income, but certainly a relatively compatible amount of intelligence is going to ensure there isn't a major power imbalance. It'll help ensure mutual respect and avoid frustrating fights where the more intelligent person is often, if he's or she is with somebody who's maybe very attractive on other dimensions but is not very bright, that's going to lead to very frustrating fights. So I really think it's important in picking both romantic partners and platonic friends for the bright person to pick someone who is relatively their intellectual peer. And of course, you'll learn a lot more, by being with somebody who's your peer or maybe a bit brighter. You don't want somebody who's way brighter than you, but who's a little brighter, so you can both be learning from each other. That's really exciting. It's a great way to have a relationship. Now let's talk about, let's end by talking about parents. If you are the parent of a bright child, to be really honest, especially in today's egalitarian era where a lot of the focus in the public schools especially is on trying to close the achievement gap, which is defined as helping low achievers to do more. And it is a relatively zero-sum game in a classroom or in a curriculum. If a teacher has got to be focusing on the lowest achievers, very often the brightest kids don't get as much attention. Unlike in the era when I was growing up, when there were big gifted programs and there was a real primacy on helping the so-called best and brightest. In today's era, if you're a parent of a bright kid, you may not, gifted programs have large programs for gifted kids. Even the term gifted has been trying to, kind of eliminated. Advanced learners they use, and it's been pretty defunded, while special ed funding has gone way up, and programs for compensatory education for low achievers has gone way up. The amount of dollars for intellectually gifted kids is way down, and that translates to very often your kid likely to be bored in school or placed in what could be described without too much exaggeration as indentured servitude, spending a significant proportion of the class day not learning and growing him or herself, but, for example, your kid's in the 4th grade and reading on a 6th grade level, he may be asked in today's mixed ability class to tutor a kid who's reading The Cat in the Hat. That may teach tolerance, but it's not exactly a formula for teaching a kid to grow and keep getting better and better and living up to their potential. So it tends to fall on the parent, and I'm going to assume most listeners to this radio show don't have the money these days. The sticker price for private schools is crazy, and many listeners to public radio, which this is, have an ideological commitment to public education, even if it means their kid is going to be somewhat sacrificed in the process for their social values. So let's assume your kid is going to be in a public school with a wide range of kids and teachers who are focusing on low achievers. It really behooves you to try to keep your ear to the ground as to which teacher for a given grade, upcoming grade, is particularly at least attuned to the needs of bright kids, not just slow learners. And so you can't do this every year, but try to meet with the principal or the school counselor and explain that your kid has been bored, say, in the previous year in school, and you've heard that Ms. Johnson is particularly good with bright kids, and wondered if your child might be placed in that class. It won't always work, but that's that one act is a one-time act that can make a big difference in your child's life for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, assuming we go back to school with COVID, for 180 days. Second thing, of course, is supplementation. Every kid, no matter how much of a brainiac, really, it shouldn't always be intellectual, but neither should you force feed non-intellectual activities. There are some kids who, yes, would love, no matter how bright, want to play basketball afterwards or play the flute or do ballet or watch cartoons, which is fine. You don't need to pump your kid with high IQ activities every minute. But certainly think about where there are after-school activities that are consonant with your kid. Does he or she want an after-school computer program, or like I live near the Lawrence Hall of Science in Berkeley that offers really great after-school programs in science and math that tend to be on a high level. But again, I want to stress, don't force your kid into being purely academic. There are some kids who, need non-academic activities like playing soccer or whatever, or also just vegging out. I'll be candid, some of my very happiest times as a kid were unstructured, where I would choose to read or play around on the piano or just look at snowflakes light upon the window, or to play basketball. I tended to play basketball by myself, practice my offhanded dribbles and stuff. Those are great moments. You're not trying to deprive your child of a childhood unless he or she wants. If he or she loves reading and studying and taking advanced classes and whatever, doing after school, of course, that's great. And that's also true, of course, of summer camps. And again, I think as a parent, it's very important to stress that no matter how bright your kid, he or she is human, and therefore is entitled to make mistakes and not going to be brilliant all the time, and can be silly and stupid, and it's fine on occasion. The kid who is blessed with the ability to be bright and learn quickly and abstract well and reason well, they don't need to be working every minute. Rather it's almost the opposite. If a kid is a slow learner, that's the kid who probably needs more time trying to, in after school, more academic programs, so they can at least be functional in reading and math and critical thinking and the like. But a really bright kid, unless the kid really wants to of quite academic after school experience, you certainly should open the door to their doing those kind of activities. I think that's really all I want to say. So to sum up a little bit, as we started the show, we talked about somebody who was bright, but not as bright as a highly accomplished parent. And the important thing there may be to change the metric. Rather than saying, don't compete, we all want to be excellent, even compared to our parents. But you might want to choose the metric that's going to enable you to compete on your terms, and be excellent on your terms. We're all different. I can't draw worth a damn, but I can play the piano. So I would never try to compete on the art dimension, but I would on the piano dimension. If recognize whether you are the bright person or somebody recognize that intelligence has its burdens. You're always feeling you have to be smart. You're always in the catch-22 of either showing your intelligence and risking seeming like a know-it-all, or dumbing yourself down, which ain't fun. And there are a number of other burdens. The burden to be the smartest person in the room, the burden to make a big difference. It ain't all roses, and so there's that. Then, as I said, in the workplace, try to indeed find kindred spirits to work with intellectually. That can be rewarding, as well as in your personal life. And finally, again, remember that we're all human, whether you're super bright or not. And so I want to thank you for listening or watching if you're watching this on YouTube. I want to remind you, this is Marty Nemko reminding you that we find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.